Welcome to the Plain Books podcast. Today, we are undertaking a really significant deep dive. We're looking at a book that I think genuinely changed the conversation around faith and skepticism for a whole generation. That book is The Reason for God by Timothy Keller.
Absolutely. And it's not just, another defense of faith. It's framed as a conversation.
Yeah.
It's really designed to push both believers and skeptics to look at their own assumptions, things they haven't really questioned.
And Keller himself had this unique background, didn't he? Starting Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan.
Right, in the late 80s. And people genuinely told him, this is a fool's errand. New York City, especially young professionals back then, highly secular, pretty cynical.
Yeah, not exactly fertile ground, you'd think, but Redeemer just exploded. It grew, became this incredibly vibrant place, young people, singles, very diverse ethnically, right there in the heart of all that skepticism.
So this book really comes out of that context. Thousands of conversations with doubters.
So the goal for this episode isn't about, trying to convince anyone of anything specific. It's more about offering a comprehensive shortcut. We want to help you understand let's say, the intellectual firepower and the deep human insights Keller gathered from all those dialogues.
Yeah, and his sources are so wide-ranging. It's not just theology. He pulls from C.S. Lewis, N.T. Wright, sure, but also Robert Louis Stevenson, Dan Brown, philosophy, anthropology.
Yeah.
It's quite a mix.
So our mission here for this podcast episode is really to navigate that polarization Keller talks about. This idea that, weirdly, both strong belief and strong skepticism are growing side by side globally.
Right. And he suggests a way forward that needs mutual respect, but also confidence and modesty in what you believe. It's a tricky balance.
And the key tool he gives us, this is central, I think, is the idea that we have to doubt our doubts.
Exactly. That's the core concept we're going to unpack today, going through his main arguments.
So the challenge for you, listening, is maybe to try and spot the hidden faith, the unexamined beliefs underneath your own skepticism or even your own faith. See if these ideas can genuinely enhance your life, sharpen how you think about these big questions. Okay, so let's dive into the first half of the book. Keller systematically takes on what he sees as the 7 biggest intellectual and, frankly, emotional roadblocks to faith. And the first one is right there, the intellectual barrier. The feeling that, faith just isn't compatible with being smart with critical thinking in the modern world.
Yeah, and Keller admits he struggled with this himself. In college, he hit those classic questions. If God's good, why is there so much evil? What about all the other religions out there? The big ones.
So how did he get past that?
Well, his breakthrough was realizing that skepticism itself, it's also a leap of faith. It requires belief. His core point is this. Every single doubt you might have, let's call it belief A, maybe Christianity isn't historically reliable. That doubt is actually built on top of another belief, belief B. And belief B is usually something positive, something unprovable, like maybe only science can give us real truth.
Okay, can you give a solid example? Because that sounds a bit abstract, but I feel like it's key to his whole approach.
Definitely. Take a really common one. Oh, there can't be just one true religion. All paths must lead to God, basically.
Yeah.
That sounds super open-minded, right? Inclusive. But Keller points out that statement itself is a huge faith claim. It's an assertion, not something you can prove empirically. And ironically, it contradicts what most major religions actually claim about themselves. They do claim unique truths.
So if you say nobody can know absolute truth, you're claiming to know an absolute truth. The truth that nobody can know absolute truth. It's like you're standing outside the whole system, claiming you know how the whole system works, which is exactly what you just said nobody can do. It sort of collapses on itself.
So the challenge he throws down to the skeptic is, look, if you demand evidence and rational justification for Christianity, fine. But you absolutely have to apply that same rigorous standard to the foundations of your own worldview.
Exactly. If you say, well, morality is just relative, everyone decides for themselves, you're still making a massive, unprovable claim about how humans work, about morality itself. You're taking a leap of faith into believing that individual autonomy is the ultimate source of moral truth, and that's certainly not a universally accepted idea, historically or culturally.
Right. So the active participation challenge for everyone listening is take a moment, think about your strongest assumption, maybe your biggest doubt about faith. What's the underlying belief that doubt rests on? Be honest. You have to doubt that doubt too. That's the call for intellectual fairness, yeah.
Okay, that handles the kind of purely intellectual side, but often these objections are much more visceral, gut level, which brings us to objection 2. The problem of evil and suffering. This hits hard.
Oh, absolutely. probably the biggest one for many people. Keller directly addresses the philosophical argument from people like J.L. Mackie. A God who is all good and all-powerful wouldn't allow pointless evil. Since pointless evil clearly exists, that kind of God can't exist.
It seems logical. Devastating, even.
It does. But Keller's move is, again, to uncover the hidden assumption. The hidden premise is, if evil seems pointless to me right now with my limited understanding, then it must actually be pointless.
So questioning our ability to judge what's ultimately pointless.
Kind of, but more fundamentally, he flips it. He asks, following thinkers like C.S. Lewis, if the universe is just, as Bertrand Russell put it, an accidental collocation of atoms, just random stuff happening, then why on earth are we so outraged by injustice? Why does the violence of natural selection or a child's suffering feel wrong?
Because it does.
But why does it? If there's no ultimate standard of good, no moral lawgiver, then that feeling of wrongness is just what? A chemical reaction, a leftover evolutionary quirk. Keller argues the very act of objecting to evil, of feeling that deep sense that things ought not be this way, actually points towards a transcendent standard of justice. A standard that only really makes sense if there's something beyond the material world, if God exists.
Wow. Okay, so the problem of evil, in a strange way, becomes a clue for God's existence. Because without God, you lose the basis for calling anything evil in the first place.
Precisely. If we're just animals, survival of the fittest, then our outrage at suffering is, well, it's irrational in a purely materialistic worldview. The problem of suffering is actually a massive problem for atheism, too, because it dissolves the very standard we use to judge things as objectively evil.
I get the logic, I do. But like you said, this is visceral. If someone's child is dying, hitting them with, well, your objection assumes a transcendent standard feels incredibly cold. How does Keller connect this philosophy to real human pain? He talks about people in his church, right? A woman whose husband was martyred?
He absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the bridge isn't more argument. It's the core Christian claim about who God is. It's the doctrine of the suffering God. This is unique. Unlike gods in many other systems who remain distant, aloof, Christianity claims God himself entered into the suffering. Voluntarily.
You mean in Jesus?
Yes. Look at Jesus facing the crucifixion. Keller points out he wasn't some stoic hero gritting his teeth. The Gospels say he was deeply distressed and troubled. Mark 14. He cries out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27. This isn't just physical pain, it's cosmic abandonment. Deep spiritual agony.
So God wasn't just watching sympathetically, he was in it. Emmanuel, God with us, even in that darkest moment of feeling utterly alone.
Exactly. He experienced the depth of human suffering and cosmic alienation from God, paradoxically, as God. He absorbed it.
And that leads to hope. How?
It leads directly to the Christian hope.
Yeah.
The resurrection. This isn't just about escaping a bad world to go to heaven. It's a promise of total restoration. Keller uses that great line from Tolkien, where Sam Gamgee realizes in Mordor, is everything sad going to come untrue? That's the idea. The resurrection guarantees that every awful thing, every injustice, every tear won't just be wiped away, but somehow redeemed, woven into a future joy that's actually greater because of the suffering that preceded it. It makes the eventual victory more profound.
Okay. That's a very different perspective on suffering. Let's shift gears to objection 3. This is the religion as a straitjacket idea. People feel like absolute truth claims, especially religious ones, just crush freedom, they stifle creativity, they're bad for cultural diversity. Keller mentions a young artist, Chloe, feeling this way.
This often comes bundled with relativism. The classic illustration is the parable of the blind men and the elephant. One feels the trunk, thinks God is like a snake. One feels the leg, thinks God is like a tree.
One feels the tail, thinks God is like a rope. Yeah. The point being, everyone grasps only a part of the truth. No one sees the whole elephant, so no single religion can claim to have the full picture.
Right. But Keller, citing thinkers like Leslie Newbegin, points out the fatal flaw in the analogy.
Which is?
The person telling the story. How does the storyteller know that each blind man is only grasping a part of the elephant unless the storyteller claims to see the whole elephant?
So the person claiming no one can see the whole truth is implicitly claiming a superior viewpoint from which they can see that everyone else's view is limited.
Exactly. The relativistic stance itself claims the very kind of total objective knowledge it denies is possible. It's self-refuting at its core.
Okay, what about the other angle on this? The idea that all our beliefs are just products of our culture. Like, you're a Christian because you grew up in Michigan, someone else is Muslim because they grew up in Morocco. Therefore, neither belief can be universally true. They're just culturally conditioned.
Yeah, the social conditionedness argument. People like Peter Berger, Alvin Plantinga tackled this. The problem is, if you argue that all beliefs are merely cultural products and therefore none can be objectively true, well, what about the belief you just stated?
The belief that all beliefs are culturally conditioned.
It is also a product of your culture.
Okay.
Probably, Western post-Enlightenment individualistic culture. So if the premise is true, the argument itself is just another culturally conditioned belief, and it undermines its own claim to universal truth. The argument eats its own tail.
So we can't escape actually having to evaluate truth claims on their merits. We have to ask which view of reality actually corresponds to the way things are.
We're forced back to it, yeah. Which brings us back to the freedom objection. Okay, maybe relativism doesn't hold up, but doesn't Christianity, with its rules and doctrines, still limit freedom?
How does constraint lead to freedom? That seems totally backward.
Keller uses this great counterintuitive idea. True freedom doesn't come from eliminating all constraints, but from finding the right constraints, the ones that fit our nature. Think about learning a musical instrument, like the piano. To achieve the freedom to truly express yourself musically, to improvise, to play complex pieces beautifully, what do you need?
Years of practice, scales, discipline, restriction.
Exactly. You have to severely restrict your freedom. Hours spent practicing boring exercises, submitting to the discipline of the instrument to unlock a much deeper, richer freedom of expression later on. Or think of a fish.
A fish needs water.
Right. Is the water a restriction? Or is it the very environment that enables the fish's freedom to swim, to be what it's meant to be? Taking the fish out of the water, giving it freedom from constraint, actually destroys its true freedom.
So the argument is that humans also have a specific environment or set of constraints that we're designed for, and living within those leads to true, flourishing, true freedom. And for Keller, that environment is
love. Specifically self-giving love, modeled on God's own nature. But think about any deep human love relationship, marriage, profound friendship. What does it require?
Commitment, sacrifice, giving up independence.
Total loss of autonomy in many ways. You can't just make unilateral decisions anymore if you want that deep connection, that intimacy, that joy. You surrender freedom to gain a greater freedom, the freedom of belonging, of being deeply known and loved. Keller argues that ultimate human freedom is found in embracing the constraints of love and self-giving, because that's what we were actually made for.
Okay, that's a powerful reframing of freedom. Now, objection 4. And this one is maybe the hardest for many people today. The church itself, the hypocrisy, the terrible history, the Inquisition, Christians supporting slavery, crusades, and then modern stuff, judgmentalism, political power plays, fanaticism. People like Mark Lilla, you mentioned, looked at this and basically said, if this is the fruit, I can't believe in the tree.
Yeah, this is the elephant in the room, always. And Keller doesn't try to excuse it or sweep it under the rug at all. He confronts it directly. He uses a couple of core Christian ideas to help understand it, though. Not justify it, but understand it. First is the doctrinal common grace.
Common grace, what's that?
It's the idea that God, out of his goodness, gives gifts, wisdom, talent, moral insight, courage, kindness to all people, whether they believe in him or not, just generously scatters them across humanity.
So, non-Christians can be genuinely good, wise, moral people, sometimes even more so than Christians.
Absolutely. According to this doctrine, we should expect that. God's grace isn't confined only to believers. So finding non-believers who live incredibly admirable lives, or believers who are flawed and hypocritical, that doesn't disprove Christianity. It actually fits within its understanding of how God works in the world.
That kind of turns the usual expectation on its head. The church isn't supposed to be a club for the morally superior.
Not at all. Keller often quotes the line, "The church is a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints." If you understand grace, you know you're there because you're sick, not because you're well. The second point he makes is that, historically, the most powerful, effective critiques of the church's own failings have come from within the Christian tradition itself, using Christian principles.
Like the Old Testament prophets calling out Israel.
Exactly. Think of Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah. They weren't outsiders criticizing. They were insiders saying, this oppression, this injustice, violates the very character of the God we claim to worship. And look at history. Who led the fight against slavery in Britain and America? People like William Wilberforce, John Woolman, deeply committed Christians who argued from their faith, often against massive opposition from other Christians.
And the civil rights movement in the U.S.
Fundamentally, a religious movement, led by pastors like Martin Luther King Jr., rooted in the biblical prophets' demands for justice. The critique of Christian hypocrisy comes most powerfully from Christian ideals themselves.
So the church's failures aren't proof against the truth of Christianity, but proof of, well, the reality of sin, which Christianity talks about constantly.
That's the argument. It shows that Christians often fail to live up to their own standards, which leads to the issue of fanaticism, the really dogmatic, intolerant, often cruel believer. Keller has a striking take on this.
What is it?
He argues these fanatics aren't too Christian. They're not Christian enough.
How does that work?
Their core problem isn't excessive belief. It's that their belief system isn't actually centered on grace. It's usually based on self-salvation, through performance being doctrinally correct, morally upright, part of the right group. It's a modern form of Phariseeism. And that system inevitably breeds pride, judgmentalism, and cruelty, because you constantly have to prove you're better, more righteous than others to feel secure. You need enemies to define yourself against.
Whereas a true grasp of grace
Should do the opposite. If you really get that you're saved entirely by unmerited favor, despite your flaws, the only possible result is profound humility, empathy, and kindness toward others who are also struggling. Fanatics are zealous, yes, but they lack the defining Christian virtue. Humility born of grace.
Okay, so we've worked through some major objections. Now Keller shifts gears in the book, moving towards the positive reasons for belief. Let's look at reason 5, which circles back to science. The idea that science has disproved Christianity. People point to evolution versus Genesis, or the impossibility of miracles, the whole Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett conflict model.
Right. And Keller's key move here is to draw a sharp line between science as a method for investigating the natural world and philosophical naturalism, which is the belief that nature is all there is.
Explain that difference. It sounds crucial.
Science, as a method, has to assume natural causes for natural events. It looks for repeatable patterns, physical explanations. It's methodologically naturalistic. Keller uses the analogy of the drunk looking for his keys under the streetlight.
Not because he lost them there, but because that's where the light is.
Exactly. Science can only see natural causes, so that's where it looks. But that methodological limitation doesn't logically allow you to jump to the philosophical conclusion that only natural causes exist anywhere, period. That's an added belief, a philosophical stance.
Yeah.
Naturalism, not a scientific finding.
So when someone says science proves there's no God, they're actually smuggling in a philosophical assumption.
Yes. They've stepped outside the bounds of science itself and are making a faith statement about the nature of all reality.
What about specific conflicts like evolution? Doesn't that contradict Genesis?
Keller points out first that this conflict is often massively overstated. The largest Christian denomination, the Catholic Church, has officially stated for decades that evolution is compatible with Christian faith. Many other denominations agree. The real argument isn't really evolution versus God. It's evolution as a biological mechanism versus evolution as an all-encompassing, godless, purely random explanation for everything. That second view is philosophical naturalism again. And plenty of top scientists, Keller mentions Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project as a prime example, are devout believers who fully accept evolution as the means God used.
In Genesis 1, if it's not a literal scientific account, how should people read it?
Keller suggests reading it according to its genre. Ask, what did the original author intend to communicate to the original audience? Many scholars, including evangelical ones, argue Genesis 1 reads much more like ancient poetry or a majestic song about who created the world and why. God made it, it is good, humans have special dignity, rather than a blow-by-blow scientific account of how. His advice is basically, don't get hung up on internal debates about Genesis interpretation first. Deal with the central claims of Christianity, who Jesus was, did he rise again, and then work outwards to secondary issues.
Okay. Moving on to reason 6. The positive clues for God's existence. This isn't about knockdown proof, right? Keller uses Lewis's analogy.
Yeah, the sun analogy. You can't necessarily prove the sun exists by staring directly into it. It's too bright, you'll be blinded. But you can see everything else because of the sun. You believe in the sun because it makes sense of everything you see. So the question becomes, which worldview, Christianity or naturalism, best illuminates and makes sense of the world we actually live in? Which one has more explanatory power for the clues we find?
What are some of those clues?
He starts with the cosmic and teleological ones. The cosmic clue is sometimes called the argument from contingency, or the mysterious bang. Basically, everything in the universe seems to depend on something else for its existence. It's contingent. If everything is contingent, the universe itself, as a whole collection of contingent things, must depend on something outside of itself for its existence.
Something non-contingent, something necessary.
Exactly. Something that doesn't need a cause. A supernatural, self-existent being. A first cause. Nature can't just pop into existence from absolutely nothing by itself. That seems less plausible than positing a creator.
And the teleological clue, that's about design.
It's more about the sheer regularity and orderliness of nature. Science itself depends entirely on the faith assumption that the laws of nature, gravity, physics, chemistry, are consistent and will continue to be consistent tomorrow. But why should they be? Naturalism itself doesn't offer a good reason for this fundamental faith in order. It just is. Christianity suggests this order reflects the mind of an intelligent creator. Even philosophers like David Hume, a skeptic, admitted this regularity was puzzling without God.
Okay, those are more abstract. What about clues that feel more personal?
Right, the aesthetic and moral clues. These hit closer to home. The aesthetic clue is that sense of profound meaning, even transcendence we get from beauty, music, art, nature. Keller quotes Leonard Bernstein talking about Beethoven, how it makes you feel deep down something is right in the world. Now, if naturalism is true, if we're just complex biological machines produced by random chance, then beauty is just
That's what?
a neurological response, a pattern recognition that somehow helped our ancestors survive. It has no objective meaning or significance.
But we don't experience it that way. We feel like beauty points to something real, something true, like love.
Exactly. Keller says you simply can't live consistently as if beauty and love are meaningless biochemical reactions. Try telling yourself that when you're deeply moved by a sunset or genuinely in love with someone, your heart affirms a reality that strict materialism denies. Our experience seems richer than naturalism allows for.
And the moral clue.
This is the big one for many. We all have this undeniable, deeply ingrained sense of moral obligation. We feel we ought to be fair, courageous, kind. We feel guilt when we aren't. And particularly, things like altruism, especially sacrificing for strangers or even enemies, are really hard to explain purely through Darwinian evolution. That kind of selflessness should have been weeded out by natural selection if survival of the fittest is the only game in town.
Why do we feel we should protect the weak, even at cost to ourselves?
Keller quotes the legal scholar Arthur Allen Leff, who famously wrestled with this. Leff wrote something like, "Napalming babies is bad. Starving the poor is wicked. All together now, says who? If there's no God, no transcendent lawgiver who gets to say what's objectively right or wrong." Leff concluded, reluctantly, that the secular intellect cannot ground objective morality. Yet our hearts, our consciences, scream that some things are objectively wrong. So Keller's point is, if your basic premise, atheism, naturalism, leads to a conclusion you instinctively know is false, that torturing children isn't objectively wrong, just a matter of taste, then logic demands you question the premise. The existence of God provides a much more solid foundation for the objective moral values we all seem to believe in.
All right, this final section moves into the core claims of Christianity itself. We start back with an objection, number 7. The whole idea of divine judgment and hell. This makes modern people deeply uncomfortable. How could a God of love possibly send people to hell?
Yeah, this is a huge stumbling block. Keller tackles it by first clarifying what wrath means in a biblical context. People often think wrath is the opposite of love, like God gets angry and loses his temper. But Keller, citing others like Becky Pippert, argues that the true opposite of love isn't anger, it's indifference. If you see something you love being destroyed, say a person caught in addiction or a community ravaged by injustice, and you don't feel anger or opposition towards the destructive force, then you don't really love them. God's wrath, in this view, is his settled opposition, his righteous anger against the evil, the cancer, as Keller puts it, that destroys the humanity he loves.
So God's wrath is actually a function of his love and justice. He hates evil because he loves goodness and his creatures.
That's the idea. A perfectly loving God must be opposed to evil, otherwise his love would be meaningless sentimentality.
Okay, but to understand judgment and hell, we need to understand sin first. What's Keller's take on sin? It's not just breaking rules, is it?
No, that's secondary. For Keller, sin, at its root, is idolatry. It's breaking the very first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." It's taking good things, perfectly fine things like career, family, success, approval, political causes, even religion itself, and making them ultimate things. Making them into God's substitutes that we rely on for our identity, security, and meaning.
Things that can't bear that weight.
Exactly. They become idols. As Simone Weil wrote, all sins are attempts to fill voids. We try to build our sense of self-worth on these things, but they're fundamentally unstable. So we become anxious, driven, competitive, fearful. We lose our inner peace, our shalom. Keller even uses the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
How does that fit?
He argues Dr. Jekyll's problem wasn't just his hidden evil side. It was that his good side, his reputation, his philanthropy, his religious observance, was actually his idol. It was his way of saving himself, proving his worth. And that very self-salvation project, rooted in pride, is what ultimately unleashed Hyde. The root sin was the idolatry of his own goodness.
Wow. Okay, so if sin is building our lives around false gods, how does that connect to hell? Is hell God just punishing rule breakers?
Keller argues, following C.S. Lewis especially, that hell isn't primarily God actively punishing people against their will. It's more like God finally giving people what they've insisted on their whole lives. Ultimate autonomy, freedom from God. If someone spends their entire existence pushing God away, centering everything on themselves, rejecting the source of all love, joy, and reality, then hell is God eventually saying, okay, you want to be the center of your own universe. You got it. It's the natural, tragic, eternal trajectory of self-absorbed life spiraling inwards forever. As Lewis put it in The Great Divorce, all that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, it wouldn't be hell. It's the horrifying fulfillment of the desire to be one's own God.
That's a sobering thought. Okay, moving to reason 8. This is maybe the absolute core of Keller's message, the crucial difference between religion and the gospel.
Yes, this distinction is everything for him. He summarizes it starkly. Religion, pretty much all human-devised religion, operates on the principle, I obey, therefore God accepts me. My performance, my morality, my rituals earn God's favor.
It's based on my effort.
Exactly. But the gospel, the Christian good news, is the precise opposite. God accepts me through Christ, therefore I obey. Acceptance comes first, freely given through Jesus' work, then comes the motivation to obey, out of gratitude and love, not fear or trying to earn something.
And the psychological impact of that shift is huge, right? It affects how you see yourself, how you treat others.
Immense. Keller talks about his own experience, realizing this truth. He frames it as this profound paradox. I am so flawed that Jesus had to die for me. That brings incredible humility, crushes your pride, yet I am so loved and valued that Jesus was glad to die for me. That brings incredible affirmation, destroys self-hatred and insecurity. Grasping both sides of that simultaneously, he argues, is what truly changes you. It frees you from both arrogance, I'm better than others, and despair, I'm worthless. It leads to what C.S. Lewis called thinking myself less, not thinking less of myself, but just being less preoccupied with myself altogether, because my identity is secure in God's grace.
But the skeptic might still ask, okay, grace is nice, but why the cross? Why did Jesus have to die? Couldn't God, being all-powerful, just forgive?
Keller addresses this directly. He argues that meaningful forgiveness, especially for deep wrongs, is never truly just forgiveness. It always comes at a cost to the one forgiving. Think about it. If someone wrongs you deeply, truly forgiving them means you choose not to make them pay. You refuse revenge. You let go of the bitterness. You absorb the debt yourself. You bear the cost of their wrongdoing in your own person. That absorption is a form of suffering, a kind of death to your own rights.
So the cross wasn't God demanding a blood payment to appease his anger, but rather God himself in Jesus, absorbing the cost of human sin and evil into himself, paying the debt that justice required.
That's the substitutionary atonement argument, yes. God's justice and holiness means sin has real consequences. It creates a debt, a rupture. But God's love means he doesn't demand we pay it, because we can't. Instead, he pays it himself, in Christ. God absorbs the cost of our rebellion to reconcile us to himself. Keller connects this to the nature of all deep love. As John Stott famously put it, the essence of sin is we human beings substituting ourselves for God, while the essence of salvation is God substituting himself for us. Think of parents sacrificing their sleep, money, independence for their children. All transformative love involves some kind of substitution, putting the beloved's needs ahead of your own. The cross is the ultimate example.
Okay, one final reason. Reason 9. The ultimate hope. This goes beyond just individual salvation. Where does Keller ground the Christian vision for the future?
He grounds it in the doctrine of the Trinity. This is unique to Christianity, the idea that God isn't just a solitary monad, but eternally exists as three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in a perfect relationship of mutual love, self-giving, and joy.
Keller uses that word, perichoresis.
Yes. It's a theological term that literally means something like dancing around. He describes the inner life of the Trinity as this dynamic, pulsating, relational reality, a dance of infinite love and mutual glorification. That is the ultimate nature of reality itself.
And how does that relate to creation and hope?
It means God didn't create the world out of loneliness or need. He created it out of the overflow of the perfect love and joy already existing within the Trinity. He created it to share that divine dance, to invite creation into that fellowship. Sin, then, is humanity fundamentally choosing to step out of that dance, to try and make ourselves the center, which leads to the breakdown and suffering we see. The whole story of the Bible, culminating in the cross and resurrection, is God's plan to rescue creation and invite us back into the dance.
And the resurrection is the proof, the down payment, that this restoration will actually happen.
Exactly. Keller stresses the historical evidence for the resurrection, how it's the best explanation for the sudden emergence of the Christian church from disillusioned Jewish followers. But more than proof, it's the guarantee. Because Jesus was resurrected physically, it means God isn't just interested in saving souls for some ethereal heaven. He's committed to the ultimate redemption and restoration of the entire physical creation. This world matters. Our bodies matter.
So the final hope isn't escaping Earth, but
the renewal of all things. A new heavens and a new earth, as the Bible puts it. A state of perfect shalom, wholeness, peace, justice, flourishing where creation reaches its intended glory, and humanity is fully restored to fellowship with God and each other, forever participating in that divine dance. It's that vision Lewis captured, where all our earthly adventures, even the greatest ones, will seem like just the cover and the title page of the real story, the one that goes on forever, each chapter better than the last. Everything sad finally coming untrue.
that's a profoundly hopeful vision. It gives meaning to working for justice and healing now, doesn't it? Because you know it's part of where history is ultimately heading.
Absolutely. It fuels engagement with the world, not withdrawal from it.
Well, we've covered a huge amount of ground in this episode. We've journeyed through Keller's responses to major intellectual and emotional objections to faith and explored the positive reasons he offers for considering the Christian worldview.
The aim, as always, wasn't to provide all the answers, but hopefully to give you, the listener, a clearer map of the arguments, some powerful insights, and tools for thinking through these things yourself. Keller's goal is a lifelong process of letting the gospel story reshape how we see everything.
And it leaves us with a challenge, really, a point where intellectual exploration meets personal decision. I think Bono from U2 put it pretty starkly when reflecting on Jesus. He said something like, you look at Jesus's claims, who he said he was, what he said he could do, and you basically have to conclude.
He was either who he said he was, the Son of God, or he was stark raving mad. A lunatic, or maybe even a liar on a colossal scale.
Yeah. There's no comfortable middle ground, is there? Just calling him a great moral teacher doesn't really work with the claims he actually made about himself. The choice he presents is kind of all or nothing.
And Keller would say the practical response, if you find yourself compelled by the evidence or the beauty of the gospel story, involves two things. First, repentance.
Which isn't just feeling bad, right, in Keller's terms.
No, it's recognizing and turning away from those idols we talked about, the self-salvation projects, the things we've built our identity on instead of God. It's confessing that pride. And second, belief, which means actively transferring your trust, shifting the foundation of your life off your own performance, your own goodness, and onto what Christ has done for you.
That's the starting point, he argues, for that lifelong journey of being shaped by grace. We really hope this deep dive has been helpful, maybe challenging, maybe clarifying, wherever you're coming from on these questions. To really dig deeper, we strongly encourage you to purchase the book, The Reason for God. Read Keller's arguments in full, see the nuance, check out his sources.
And we'd love for you to actively participate beyond just listening. You can actually engage with the author's legacy online. Timothy Keller's work continues through various channels, often using handles like @TimKellernick or searching Tim Kellernick. Maybe let those platforms know what argument or story resonated with you or challenged you from this discussion.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on the Playing Books podcast. Please do follow, subscribe, share it with others if you found it valuable, and let us know what essential books should we tackle next time.